Hello and welcome back to another video on my channel. Today I'm going to be taking a look at an article kind of recapping and closing off where the oral arguments went on Monday and how the court looks like it's ready to rule. So for that we're going to be looking at this article, and in the last video we talked about why I thought the court was likely to overturn Humphrey's executor. And I think that's kind of, looking to be true. But the reason I posited was kind of a more legal, realist approach. I looked at the politics of the time. Humphrey's executor is a decision that was released on the same day as two other decisions, and together it's noted as Black Monday because it was such a devastating day for the Roosevelt administration and their New Deal aspirations. And so Humphrey's executor at the time, that the Roosevelt administration took that case very personally. They felt like it was overly dismissive, overly confident, and it wasn't well reasoned, and they took it personally. And I think they're correct to do so. That was an extremely conservative court that did in fact have a lot of animosity towards Roosevelt, and one of them famously referred to FDR as a crippled son of a bitch. And so I think that's that legal realism is not misplaced here. But Gorsuch does end up saying that he doesn't think Humphrey's executor was well reasoned, and I would agree with that because I think their politics were kind of influencing their decision making. But let's go ahead and let's get into the article. That's catching you up on a speed to what we discussed last time. But yeah, so again, a solid majority of the justices are appearing to agree with the Trump administration on the ability to fire the FTC commissioner. Now, where we have a real question is whether or not they're going to go so far as to overrule Humphrey's executor. So that's less clear. Now, a decision in favor of the Trump administration obviously has huge ramifications. It would significantly increase the president's power over not only the FTC, but over roughly 24 other multi-member agencies that Congress intended to be independent. And so whether it's this president or the next, or 4 presidents from now, this is going to have big ramifications. And I think some people are seeing the capacity or the potential to make a more effective executive, and some are worried about the risks that come with that. And so that's why this case is really important. Now, on behalf of the petitioner in this matter, the Trump administration, the U.S. Solicitor General Sauer, he essentially just talked about how the recent precedent has already kind of gotten rid of Humphrey's executor. Why not go ahead and just overrule it? The court has basically repudiated it in its recent years and its foundations. So that was interesting, but I thought what was more interesting was the respondent's side. Amit Agarwal was representing Rebecca Slaughter, and here he says, if the Trump administration is correct that the removal statute at the center of the case violates the separation of powers, then all 3 branches of government have been wrong from the start of our country's history. And that contention is where I actually take issue, and something I'm going to show why I take issue with. So if we move on to the Myers case, and this Myers case is the one that preceded Humphrey's executor. And I believe this case is much more well-reasoned, and it looks at the history, going back to the 1789 first congressional debate that was specifically about the scope of removal power, and it concluded there that the decision of 1789 that the president does have inherent power to remove executive officers, and this remained to be the understanding until around the Civil War. And so let's go ahead and look at how the court went through a very in-depth reasoning, and I won't kind of rehash that. It's here for you if you want to look at it. But let's go ahead and look at the ultimate conclusion. The bill, as amended, was ordered to be engrossed and read the 3rd time the next day, June 24th, 1789. So we're going way back. And it is very clear from this history that the exact question which the House voted upon was whether it should recognize and declare the power of the President under the Constitution to remove the Secretary of Foreign Affairs without the advice and the consent of the Senate. That was what the vote was taken for. Some effort has been made to question whether the decision carries the result claimed for it, but there is not the slightest doubt after an examination of the record that the vote was, and was intended to be, a legislative declaration that the power to remove officers appointed by the President and the Senate vested in the President alone. and until the Johnson impeachment trial in 1868, its meaning was not doubted even by those who questioned its soundness. And so that is kind of why I take issue with respondents' contention that this would be contradicting all three branches of government, have been wrong from the start of our country's history. I don't think it necessarily has to go so far, but I understand why they made that argument. The justices then questioned whether decisions in Slaughter's favor could give Congress sweeping power, including the authority to convert existing cabinet departments into multi-member agencies that would be insulated from presidential control. So they're kind of worried about this fear of an usurpation of power, where if you don't like who the president appoints for a position, a cabinet position, or who they may appoint, well, Congress could just get around that and create their own branch of it or agency doing effectively the same thing or doing a lot of similar work in that area, and then layer it in a way that it's out of the president's control. And the respondents' response on this issue was, I'm sorry, a little redundant, but the contention there was, well, we haven't really seen that yet, and just because it's a theoretical problem doesn't mean we need to go so far. Like, we don't have any reason to think that will actually happen. The Supreme Court justices didn't seem to really take too much comfort in the fact that because it hasn't happened yet, it won't happen. I think they're really worried about it happening, and they want to be proactive. And that was just the impression that I got listening to oral arguments. So Argywal agreed with Chief Justice John Roberts when Roberts asked whether Congress could just take over some cabinet departments. He told Roberts that such a result is probably within the realm of possibility, although he emphasized that it would be a pretty small universe because so many cabinet departments wield at least some executive power. Justice Kavanaugh, among others, was worried about such a scenario, telling Argywal that it would allow Congress to create independent agencies without any requirement of partisan balance and with lengthy terms for agency heads. This would give Congress the ability to create agencies and thwart future presidents, and this can affect either side of the aisle, and so this is a pretty serious consideration. One of the things they also touched on in their questioning was, why is 7-year term limits for these positions granted by Congress, why is that fine, but 20-year term limits wouldn't be? Where's it stop? And respondent didn't really seem to have the best answer on that, just that, you kind of know it when you see it, or it's a reasonableness thing. So I didn't find that too compelling either. On the other side, some justices expressed concern that a ruling in favor of the Trump admin could affect not only other multi-member agencies, but it could affect similar other entities with similar removal statutes. And here, I think this concern would be misplaced. They were, thinking, for example, these justices were thinking about the United States Tax Court and the United States Court of Claims. And Argywal told the justices that if Trump prevails, everything would be on the chopping block. I think what's missing there is that, there is a distinction, even in Humphrey's Executor, with the quasi-legislative, quasi-judicial distinction, and this court could renew a similar distinction and carve these out. And clearly, the United States Tax Court and Court of Claims are more judicial bodies, exercising a more judicial power and less executive. And I think that's a distinction that could easily be made, and we can see the difference between the FTC and the United States Tax Court. So that's what I would say to that. But Justice Amy Coney Barrett also questioned Kagan's premise. She noted that maybe this could be something Congress desires as well, to sort of take power back from the agencies. So she noted Congress once had a legislative veto, which, until the Supreme Court held it unconstitutional, allowed it to overturn decisions by administrative agencies. Congress may have been willing at one time to give independent agencies like the FTC sweeping powers because it knew it could override agencies' decisions. But now, she said, independent agencies aren't accountable to either Congress or the president. So we know where ACB has her head on this issue. Although there seemed to be a clear majority that was ready to rule, Trump has the power to fire FTC commissioners. They're still really thinking about whether or not they're going to overrule Humphrey's Executor. Now, on that question, Gorsuch did call the opinion poorly reasoned, referring to Humphrey's Executor, and in what was a bad sign for Slaughter, the justices spent virtually no time on the second question presented in the case, whether even if the FTC removal statute is unconstitutional, can a federal judge order the reinstatement of an official who was fired without cause. So, All right, but ultimately, I'll touch base again with you when the decision is finally released by the court, and here we are expecting that in late June, early July, according to this. So, yeah, that's kind of all you need to know. That's where the court has its head on this, what they're really considering, what they're really worried about. So I hope you found it informative. I hope you found it helpful, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Merry Christmas.